and welcome back to the Dreamcast. I am your host, Denise Walsh. I combine science, scripture, and stories that will inspire you to dive deep, break through your own personal glass ceiling, and design a life of your dreams. Welcome back to the Dreamcast. Our next guest endured symptoms consisting of insomnia, anxiety, muscle pain, chronic fatigue, and more, and being prescribed a variety of medication, including opiates, to ease the pain, led him to developing an opiate addiction. After experimenting with numerous types of therapies, he discovered intravenous NAD therapy, which initiated a gradual and miraculous journey to health. More than a year later, our guest regained 90% of his health and took it upon himself to further investigate the therapy that practically saved his life. Please welcome the founder of the Research Center on Addiction and Brain Health, Tom Ingoglia.
Hi, Denise. How's it going? It's great to be on here.
Yes, I'm really excited to connect with you. I know you live in sunny California. I'm here in Michigan where there's just a little bit of snow on the ground. So as we get started this morning, why don't you just share with me a little bit about who you are? What do you do?
So who I am is I'm someone that got sick about I guess it was maybe 12 years ago. And I went through some very serious trials and tribulations and found a holistic breakthrough that healed me. I had brain fog, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, and I found a way to health through a vitamin called NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And now I help run a medical clinic in San Diego that uses this therapy. Very much of it is used for drug addiction, but also chronic conditions like chronic fatigue and chronic pain. We see a lot of Lyme patients. We've treated Parkinson's. We treat a lot of the therapy is used for a lot of neurodegenerative issues. We've noticed anecdotally, and I must say that this isn't an FDA-approved drug, and your results may vary. And I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm very much involved in the industry. I organized the largest NAD conference this last month, and in San Diego, the largest NAD conference to date. And that was very successful, and it's a really exciting place to be because there's a lot of talk about how NAD, there was just in this last week in Time magazine, an article saying that NAD is really the biggest thing right now in age reversal and longevity. So,
wow.
And maybe we can put that link at the end of the show or something like that. But yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Okay. So we know that holistic medicine, really treating the whole person, functional medicine is something that is really becoming more and more known in our culture. People want to try natural alternatives before they run to the doctor every single time. And so it's becoming more well known. What is NAD and how does it benefit us?
Well, NAD it's an energy carrying molecule. It's a coenzyme found in all living things. It's essential for life on this planet. It's used in the Krebs cycle. It's all over the cell. It's used in things called redox reactions. It's actually a neurotransmitter, and it's sort of a precursor to other neurotransmitters. It's used in an area of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus to regulate sleep. And we see a lot of positive results with sleep when you do intravenous NAD is the way we do our therapy. It's an essential molecule to get rid of toxins like alcohol. For every ethanol molecule, you need 2 molecules of NAD. It's used to get rid of excess glutamate, which happens with a lot of different conditions, which can kill brain cells. So a glutamate excitotoxicity, NAD gets rid of that. NAD is it's a potent anti-inflammatory, and it brings inflammation down. And there might be some promise with inflammatory diseases and inflammation in general. NAD levels in the body decline with age. That's the real big thing. And why is that important? Because this decline in age seems to be associated correlatively or causally with the aging process itself. That's the main thing. Is it aging in some part is connected with this molecule, and that's the really exciting thing. Is you see huge labs at Harvard, MIT, Australia. They're vigorously studying NAD. The Sinclair lab, even George Church at Harvard. He's one of the most famous scientists on the planet. His name has been mentioned as interested in this. But I'm kind of a regular guy, and I'm not going to say that I'm one of these high IQ scientists. I'm trying to do my part in the world, and so that's ever since I had a sort of miraculous recovery with NAD, and I think of NAD as the sort of energy of life. It ends up getting used to produce ATP in the body. I sort of think of it as the energy of all things, a force of all things, and it helps with bringing molecules together. And so I often refer to it as the force. So
interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So how did you find it? Tell us about the miracle you experienced.
I was on my 7th year of being sick. I ended up losing one of my best childhood friends from insanity, and it was brought on by a lot of drug use. And it was just a very intense time in my life because I was still very sick. There wasn't a lot of things that I could do for myself. I mean, I had one of these lives where, people did things for me, people took care of me. I had someone who would, cook food for me. I had to spend a lot of time in bed. I was very much ashamed of the lifestyle that I had. I managed to get a lot of things done. Don't get me wrong. I finished my master's degree and learned the language, but it wasn't a life where I had to pace myself. And people with chronic fatigue, they got to learn how much energy do I have right now? I can only do this, and then I have to rest. So when I lost my best friend, and actually his brother died a month prior to that from liver disease.
Oh my goodness.
And about a week later, after he died, I lost half my family in a car crash. And they all died instantly. And
oh my goodness. Was that all in California with you, or did they live elsewhere?
This was in Hawaii. So and my brother, I lived in Costa Rica. So I had to my family's like, well, you got to go to Hawaii first to get your mother, and then we got to bury them in California, and then we got to have another funeral in Costa Rica. And I was like, I can't physically do that. It was a very tough time, and he pulled it together to, sorry, I'm getting a little bit emotional here, but it was at that point I said to myself, you know what, I'm going to figure out. I had already gone to dozens of doctors, and I was already very, very much involved in health. And so it sort of led me on a trajectory to find maybe just do some out of the box thinking. And so some of the therapies I started looking at were just very much off the wall. And NAD therapy was only being used in the United States in two locations that was public, and it was used for addiction. And I talked to some people. We were talking about the mitochondria, this energy powerhouse of the cell, and how maybe NAD would refuel and give me my energy. And I had I had my mitochondria looked at with Raman spectroscopy, like very molecular view of my mitochondria before and after I did NAD, and saw major improvements. But I was very much focused on the mitochondria. And so I called, and it just so happened there was a place in San Diego that was doing NAD therapy. And I called and I said, do you think this might work? And they said, well, we don't know. It's a roll of the dice.
So they were already using it primarily for addiction, and you were coming to them with chronic fatigue saying, I need help too.
I was coming to them for chronic fatigue, chronic pain, brain fog, insomnia, depression, and I also had was substance dependent to opiates.
Because of the chronic pain, and that's what they typically,
because of the chronic pain. I'm not really an addictive personality, but they said to me,
but they prescribe that.
They said to me, Tom, you have an addiction to opiates over the phone. And I said, no, I don't. I don't have an addiction to opiates. I'm taking them for my pain. They're like, so it actually took me a couple of years to realize that, if someone is on opiates, any mammal is on opiates for a certain period of time, your brain automatically needs that drug in order to feel normal. And so that was something that was very hard for me to come to grips on, is that I was actually experiencing pain and lower hormone levels and more fatigue because of the addiction. So that it sort of cascaded because of this drug. Opiates were never intended for long-term use. They were intended for short, acute situations and people who are terminally ill. And there wasn't a lot of research on that. And the research that's coming out now is showing that the addiction is very real, and there's a lot of unfortunate souls that never intended to get addicted to these drugs.
Well, and what fuels up for me, and I want to keep going with your story, but I have some family members who experienced problems with this. And the hard part is when your doctor prescribes it, you think it's okay. And so you are doing what the doctor said, when in fact it ends up taking over and ruining so many aspects of your life. Oh my goodness. So what did you do next? You hit your rock bottom. You lost all of these important people in your life, and you decided, okay, something has got to give. You sought out NAD. Tell us a little bit about your early treatment.
Well, I mean, it's Paul, and I'm good friends with the original person who brought NAD back to the United States. A lot of the research was done 50 years ago in the United States, and then sort of lost. The technology was purchased by a pharmaceutical company. It sort of lost. There was a loss of interest. It's very hard to synthesize. It's very expensive to make. But she managed to bring it back to the United States. But she said to me when I went and visited her in Louisiana, she said, you had a dark night of the soul. And I'm like, what is that? And she said, well, this is a poem from St. John the Cross, where you have all these terrible things that that you've had in your life, and if you see God, He's going to be begging you. You're going to have Him beg you for forgiveness. So it was really a sort of you never really, it's amazing, where you get into these very difficult times in your life, and where you question everything. But sometimes it's either gonna make you or break you. And that was it was a time in my life where, I mean, things didn't really make sense, but I think everything makes sense now.
Yeah. So, it's amazing when you're in that position. You can either crawl under a rock and stay there, or you can use the pain, the hurt, everything that you've learned, and figure out a way to use it for good and give back to the world. And it seems like you've been able to do that.
Well, I came in, and they just so happened to have a place in San Diego. So I drove in, and they told me, you should be feeling something about, day 5, like this amazing sort of breakthrough. Maybe day 4, and it had gotten to day 7. I was there to get 10 days of therapy, and I got to day 6, and I it became I sort of came to the conclusion that it was a big waste of money, and that and I started to get very emotional about it. Looking back at it now, I was going through some of the withdrawals of opiates. Now, they forced, like I said, they sort of said, you got to come off of the opiates while you're here. You can do whatever you want when you leave. But, so I was for me, it took me until day 7, things started to light up. I noticed there was just sort of a perceptual shift where the world seemed brighter. The world seemed to slow down for me. Everything seemed to be calmer. And one thing that we see a lot from NAD treatment is people have a stronger response to music. Like the music seems to have this really strong, immense emotional sensation to it. It's radical, and it doesn't. I don't hear that response from a lot of people, but around day 7, I noticed my energy. Well, the things I came in for, my energy went up. It just all of a sudden I had all this burst of energy, and I had this sort of my pain had gone down too. So.
And you're not on the opiates anymore. So
Well, yeah, I wasn't on opiates.
That's amazing.
This is in the middle of a withdrawal from opiates.
Right.
And I just started feeling amazing. And so I went out and I was in the ocean, and that's where I really felt this feeling, It's like being out on the water. I was out in the water with my friend. He's like, "Come out, let's go in the ocean." Let's and so I'm out there playing the ocean, and it's like, that was the like, floating out there. It was like this. It was like I don't know why I'm so emotional right now. I mean, I've told this story so many times, but it was a moment of grace and peace that I hadn't felt in a while. So
you felt lighter. My goodness, for 7 years you were laying in bed and having people make you food and having to compartmentalize your energy so you would rest. And all of a sudden you felt light, it seems.
And then day 8, like a lot of my symptoms came back, and it was a whole roller coaster ride. Wow. And then day 9, I felt everything I felt on day 7, and it was, and they're like, "Well, we don't know what's going to happen, Tom." And I said, "Well, normally I don't, when I have a relapse and all my energy goes away, it usually takes maybe a month to get my energy back. And quite clearly this is something different, because this has never happened to me before." And so I knew at that moment that I was going to get better, and I didn't know how much. I didn't know if I was going to still fully recover. And I still hadn't fully recovered, and I ended up staying a couple extra days. But that was the beginning of my journey. And by the time a year had passed, I fully recovered, and it was something that I never dreamed of. At that point, I completely gave up on getting all my health back.
Yeah. Tell me about that hope. For the first time you felt hope. What doors did that open for you?
I guess it made everything so much easier. I mean, I think when you go through some of these dark times, it makes everything a lot easier once you're out of it. But regardless, that's life is going to be sometimes pretty nasty, and you've got to find a way to find meaning in everything. And that's sort of what this has all taught me, is that if you're searching for happiness, you're probably going to fall short. But if you're searching for meaning, it's going to sort of give you some sense of stability when things are really bad.
Well, I love that. Honestly, I love that. If you're searching for happiness, you'll always fall short. If you're searching for meaning, you'll find it every time. And even if you had bad days, now that you had hope, you knew you weren't going to stay there. So you kind of had your eyes on feeling better, regardless of the ups and downs in the process.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how things have sort of transpired. I thought there was something very special about this vitamin, and I continued to come in to get boosters, and they said, you should come in and get a booster and it's an IV. Okay. So it's an IV drip that lasts 8 hours, and they insert a catheter into your vein, and you have a very slow drip of NAD. And it's a time commitment. It's a little bit inconvenient, quite frankly. It's a little bit like being on a plane or stuck on a cruise ship that you don't want to be on, and you get the drip, and quite frankly, like many or most of the people that come in have this. They tend to have a huge burst of energy, and they tend to have lower anxiety. And if they're on drugs, they get a great deal of benefit from coming off of the drugs. So, it doesn't work for everybody. It's this NAD is not an easy thing for doctors to administer. And in opening and helping with a medical clinic, as I have, helping the doctor, practice this area of holistic medicine. We're able to really help a great number of people out there, and it's just been a huge joy to help people come off of drugs and help them with anxiety, depression, fatigue, pain, neurodegenerative conditions, all sorts of a whole host of things. But it had really been something that was unknown until December 2013. So there was a Harvard scientist named David Sinclair who published a work about on mice that were administered with a molecule called nicotinamide mononucleotide that converts very quickly into NAD in these mice. And what they examined the tissue of the mice, and they noticed that, and that was the big thing, is there was verbiage regarding how he says that essentially that the age of the tissue was reversed. And that also made it into Time magazine. And he ended up becoming Time magazine's 100 most influential scientists. When the next magazine on the 100 came out, because of that real groundbreaking journal. So here I am thinking to myself, I just did the real thing. I didn't do the precursor, and no one even really knows about this. This is like, at that point I was all in. I only wanted to be involved with NAD and nothing else.
Now, you mentioned that NAD is basically food for mitochondria. It helps boost healthy mitochondria. Tell us a little bit about how it works in your body. What does it have to do with mitochondria, telomeres, all of that?
Well, okay, so now I might make a mistake here or there because my background is in finance, but NAD, you want to have a lot of it in the body. It's used for a number of different things, and one of the important things it's used for is in correcting DNA damage. So in any given day in your body, a particular cell might have, let's say, tens of thousands of DNA lesions that need to be corrected. And NAD helps activate an enzyme called PARP, poly-ADP ribose polymerase, that sort of examines the DNA, the genome, and it corrects any of the breaks. And so that's a really important part of life, just using the PARP enzyme to correct the DNA. NAD is also used. It activates a class of enzymes called sirtuins, which sort of play this instrument called the genome or the DNA, and it has an impact on the epigenetics of the genome. So it turns off genomes. It turns off the expression of certain genes. So essentially, the turning off of these expressions, scientists think, is associated with anti-aging sort of properties.
Wow.
So they're called sirtuins. Yeah.
So it's so interesting to me because not only chronic fatigue, but addiction, obesity, there's a lot of diabetes things right there. We say they run in my family and it's just a part of my DNA. And, we kind of have done Newton's law where we say, oh, I'm a victim to it and there's not much that I can do. But epigenetics has told us through tons of research by now that we really can turn genes on and off, and only 1% of our expression is based on our DNA. We have the ability to decide what gets turned on or off in a sense. And it sounds like NAD is something that helps with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's other things you can do besides getting an IV of NAD. I mean, there's Sinclair's now working on this nicotinamide mononucleotide. There's also, taking niacin. It's been around. There's sort of like a secret cult following about taking high dose niacin. There's a famous cardiologist named Dr. Sinatra who's prescribed niacin for a lot of people that have had heart conditions. I personally think that IV NAD, it's something that you feel, and a lot of our patients will, a certain percentage of our patients will say that NAD was intravenously was like the most incredible experience of their life. So, it doesn't happen for everybody that comes in, but it's quite something to hear. Like, this was the greatest thing that's ever happened to me to take this. But you can also, like you said, a diet, like intermittent fasting, low carb diets will increase NAD. They'll also increase autophagy, which is when the cell starts to eat it's recycle some of its own garbage that it has, and it sort of soups up cells and makes cells stronger. It also lowers an enzyme called mTOR, and so there's besides diet. I mean, like eating more antioxidants like carotenoids could increase NAD because you have less exposure to free radicals. So there's less need to use NAD. So you by eating these foods, and antioxidants can have epigenetic effects too, there's certain things that are going on there. So exercise can be a huge benefit for NAD. So this sort of like stressing the body in reasonable amounts, the stress response, getting more sleep, avoiding alcohol. There's also things that we can do from our center with telemedicine in terms of sending people, nasal spray and patches of NAD. And at the conference, a guy came up to me. We just had the conference I just mentioned before. He came up to me and said, I haven't even done IV NAD. I've only done the nasal spray, and I have to tell you've changed my life. And it was really nice to hear that. And
wow.
And it's so interesting because he's sort of an outlier. I don't know if I'll ever hear from someone who says that, just taking this nasal spray that doesn't have a very potent dosage of NAD has had such a profound impact on him. But so, that's the thing is in the healthcare paradigm that we have, the FDA sort of wants us to pretend that everybody's alike, but the reality is that it really isn't like that. That there's so much variation, and doctors need to have the ability to work with all these different kinds of substances and dosages to figure out because you got to really have a therapy for N=1, and that's just my personal opinion. Having these trials where everybody takes the same dosage I think is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. So one question before we move on is, how do we lose NDA? Why do you think NAD? I'm sorry. Why do you feel like you had such low amounts during your years of chronic fatigue?
Well, I would say, a lot of these toxins in our body require NAD to get rid of the toxins. So all drugs, every drug family requires NAD, and there's depletion there. But also modern diet. Okay, so NAD's got a long history. So at our conference, Dr. Ross Grant, he's very instrumental in completing a pathway called the chirinic pathway, which is the conversion of an amino acid called tryptophan to NAD. And I mean, it may not seem important to you, but this pathway was a pathway that wasn't necessarily discovered by this pioneer of medicine named Dr. Joseph Goldberger, who was very important in the turn of the last century. There was an epidemic of a nutritional disease called pellagra. Okay, and it was the scourge of the South, and people would get this sort of scaly skin. I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones, but it was there's a character in there that gets this infectious disease. It looks like that. You can have this like almost black skin on the sun exposed areas, but you also have dermatitis and insanity and diarrhea and eventual death. Joseph had already worked on eradicating other diseases like diphtheria, and he worked with yellow fever and dengue fever, and he had actually contracted a bunch, at least two of these diseases. I mean, he was such a man of the people, but he encountered so much backlash when he tried to explain, this is sort of a nutritional thing. This is not something that you get. It's not an infectious disease. During a time when all the focus was on infectious diseases, and there was a lot of issue around that. And he eventually, I mean, he did all these ridiculous things like, grinding down the skin of the people with pellagra to show that it wasn't infectious, and consuming it with his wife and the feces, and they were injecting it to try to prove that it wasn't a disease, that it was actually the food. And so our modern diets really changed with when we started to incorporate corn. Wow. And he had done some of the research on what was happening in Italy with the sort of carbohydrate-based diets, where pellagra was big there, and the Italians thought that this was corn. That's like introducing corn into the diet had it did not. There wasn't a lot of niacin, or they didn't know what it was back then. They didn't have any of this identified. But when you have there's two different ways to get NAD. One is through the getting adequate protein, where tryptophan converts into NAD, and the other one is through vitamin B3. So, and essentially, he eventually convinces society that they've got to sort of get a better diet. But pellagra and this pellagra eventually sort of gets eradicated with the introduction to niacin in flour. Now the FDA is mandating that niacin is in flour, and it wasn't until, but you had some new doctors come along. There was Dr. Abraham Hoffer, who was a Canadian doctor who worked with a lot of veterans from World War II. And he worked in insane asylums, and he saw the similarities. He was also a huge early pioneer of psychedelics too. He helped formulate even that name, psychedelic. So he was just this larger than life scientist, doctor, who worked in an insane asylum, and he was dosing his schizophrenic patients with niacin, and his success was was incredible, and he was challenged. During the course of his career, there were 17. He claims there were 17 of his patients that young teenagers who recovered from schizophrenia went on to college and then medical school and then became medical doctors. So he's this he was this amazing, intelligent, sort of salt of the earth, God-fearing pioneer who eventually just sort of, he sort of gave up his practice at the end of his life to focus on vitamins. And he began an organization called Orthomolecular Medicine. His website's orthomolecularmedicine.org, but it's sort of a stream of thought that he and Linus Pauling, a double Nobel Prize winner, had. They came up with the idea that why don't we give the human body what it needs instead of something that's synthetic? That's basically the concept.
Absolutely. Right? Goodness. It's really, when you give your body good nutrition, it does what it's supposed to do. And that's not the way of the current medical field direction.
But Abraham Hoffer was a friend of Bill Wilson, the founder of AA. And,
oh, wow. Okay.
And Bill Wilson suffered from depression. Even though he had been successful with sobriety, he still had some problems psychologically that he had trouble with. And so Abraham Hoffer had recommended that he take vitamin B3. Actually, Hoffer claims that Bill Wilson came up with the word B3. He's like, it was Bill Wilson that popularized the word B3. But there was one point, in the history where Hoffer was running from some drug corporation who wanted to sue him to get all the intellectual property for NAD, because he was using NAD at the time, and he's seeing these results with schizophrenia and with addiction and with all these other conditions with NAD. And so he's hiding out at Bill Wilson's house so that he doesn't get served with civil papers, and because he's Canadian, he was only in New York for a while. But Bill Wilson saw some amazing things with niacin, and it was something that never really got implemented in AA, because AA had so many great things about it, and they wanted to keep it pure. They wanted to keep it spiritual. They wanted to keep it non-monetary, for whatever reason. I wasn't there, so I don't know exactly what went on. But that's sort of the story. Hoffer said about NAD, he said, it might take 50 years before anyone really realizes that how amazing this is. And he was attacked for niacin though at the time, and he was really the doctor for niacin, and he was attacked for it, and he thought that it just helped with so many different things, and that we were so depleted of it. And again, it has to do with the diet. He saw schizophrenia and pellagra as something at the end of the spectrum for NAD deficiency. He saw that at the end of the sort of pellagra being the extreme, and then schizophrenia sort of a subclinical pellagra, and that society just really needed more of this substance. So that was really sort of his take on things. And the world wasn't really ready for that. The world saw it as the medical community saw this as a dangerous thing, and that you couldn't even get niacin in a high tablet. I mean, you probably only get like maybe 25 milligrams. Now, a lot of people who are sort of part of this cult following of Hoffer, they might take 2 grams of niacin a day. So, and so that's sort of the thing. And so today, I see so many amazing things with NAD, and I've been contacted by various, honored to be contacted by various different research organizations to study NAD with all these different conditions. So things like Alzheimer's and autism. So just in the last week, I mean, I've talked to people who want to study this with autism and with Alzheimer's and with addiction a couple of weeks ago, to do some just to do some larger trials to sort of substantiate what we saw. There was another doctor about 50 years ago. His name was Dr. O'Halloran, who worked in Washington State, who did so much work with using IV NAD and addiction. And so he had all this information that never really got tabulated, and there really isn't that much information on it. But I mean, NAD's been around for a long time. It went underground. It went to different countries. And sorry, I feel like I hope I'm not talking too much history about this.
No, it's so interesting. And I heard JJ Virgin, if you guys haven't heard of her, she's basically a celebrity nutritionist, personal trainer, has been in the health industry for years and years. And she works consistently with Dr. Mark Hyman, who is the functional medicine doctor of the Cleveland Clinic. And I'm pretty sure that's it. I should double check that. But he is a pioneer essentially in functional medicine. And I heard them say that if you are coming out, like if a doctor or somebody is basically saying things and everybody goes, what are you talking about? Then you're typically the person they want to hang out with, because you're at the front end of a movement. And even though the world might not have been ready years ago to fully understand the importance of these vitamins in our system, we truly are, in my opinion, creating a brain cell for this holistic approach to health. So you spent a year doing this yourself. You experienced a complete 180 where you have more energy, you're lighter, you're calmer, your anxiety's down. Honestly, it sounds like you feel like you got yourself back, like you found yourself in this process. How did you get connected to then working at the clinic?
That's a good question. In large part, it was meeting with Paula Metier in Springfield, Louisiana, was that really the deciding factor. You know, I was out in Louisiana for a brain conference, and I drove out, and I was getting a booster of NAD, and I decided to get a booster of NAD to meet her. I really just wanted to meet her, and I wanted to meet her husband, a psychiatrist. And it was there where they showed me so much kindness, and they were coming from this other place. And it's, if you ever go to Springfield, where their center is at, it's surrounded by ponds, and there's these trees with moss on them, and they're near a cemetery that has like coffins. It's, made of stone that sort of stick out. It's just really just unusual. I mean, so it was really an amazing experience to meet them and be sort of welcomed in to the world of NAD. And at the time, there was only maybe 4 clinics in the United States using it. And I told her, I said, I really want to open up an NAD clinic. And she said, you should. I think, and there was someone else that was working there. Her name was Jean, and she said, there's really a destiny, Tom. Like, I think this is your destiny. So that was, and that's the thing about NAD, I think, and overcoming some of these experiences, there's really a strong sense of destiny, and like there's a plan for everything. I think you have a stronger spirituality having gone through these experiences and having gotten to NAD. I always feel like there's, I don't know, like that I'm a part of something greater, and certainly it's helped by going to a more, hanging out with these spiritual types in rural, sort of God-fearing Louisiana. So, so yeah, it's just it was so cool to be in Louisiana for the first time and meeting them. So, yeah.
Well, and I think sometimes we need an outside person to say, this is what I see in you. You're so passionate about NAD and what it's done for your life. You've got to, like, you can't stay quiet about this. You've got to tell as many people as you can, because there's other people just like you that are curled up in bed wondering, how can I live like this? And they need to know that this exists. And so by them kind of speaking that life into you, you ran with it. So you opened the clinic. What does the clinic do now?
So the clinic is the NAD Treatment Center, and it also, so we'll bring in any number of patients. We help specialize with drug addiction, things like.
Now, one quick question: is this the same center you went to, or is this a different one?
Well, strangely, the gal that was doing the business development in another clinic for NAD, their therapy was no more because she left San Diego and went somewhere else. And I told myself, well, if I start my own clinic, then I'll always have a steady supply of NAD.
Absolutely. So the door opened and you took it.
So yeah, we brought NAD back to San Diego, and then we also have a nonprofit so that we can do more research and substantiate some of the anecdotal things that we're seeing. And then we just through the conference as well. That was a success. We're also looking at, with all the interest in NAD in terms of longevity, it's something that needs to be studied. It's like, what's going on there? Is there something that's going on there? Are we getting closer to finding a substance that is really doing something there? So what's going on right now in the world right now in the United States is the life expectancy of the average American has gone down for 2 years in a row. And this hasn't happened since this usually only happens during world wars, but there is a war going on. It's a drug war, and what we're seeing is a higher incidence of drug overdose, and it's bringing down the life expectancy of the average American. There's also a higher incidence of suicide, and I'm under the impression this has to do with the fact that 1 in 5 are on psych meds, and we're not solving this problem appropriately. And so,
I just heard a stat yesterday that said the third leading cause of death in the United States is the medical system.
And
isn't that interesting?
And even JAMA, I don't have the source right here, but the Journal for the American Medical Association said it was number 4. Okay. So, I mean, when you have the Medical Doctors Association saying that,
exactly.
It's probably, it might even be worse than number 4, right? So that's what's going on. And the probable future is that we have a further decline in life expectancy. I happen to love Costa Rica. I go down to Costa Rica. It is kind of the third world. But I have some farm down there. They have a higher life expectancy than we do. And it's because,
do you know what it is?
I think I don't know if it's like 79 years old or something, but it's they're about a year and a half higher than where we're at. And they have a different mentality when it comes to medicine. And what's going to happen, what's probably going to happen in the United States is a further decline in life expectancy. We are going to be our medical system is going to be so inundated with Alzheimer's patients because of that's what we're seeing down the pipeline. It's such an expensive thing. And then of course we have an aging baby boomer population. It's the future is really just a sort of economic bankruptcy of the United States. But if the possibility that I want to be a part of is one where we have the ability to use things like NAD and other substances. We have a society that is geared towards nutrition, vitamins, naturopathic, holistic, integrative medicine, where doctors could take on a not a one size fits all approach to people's medicine and really custom tailor where that's the future. Is this sort of approach where we get an extended life, where we're using things like NAD, where we're using other therapies. And there's quite a bit of research right now on NAD with all the different age-related diseases, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, COPD, and cancer has to do with age, how old you are, and NAD seems to be this thing that can handle all of them. And of course, it's going to be a threat, and that's why it's on trial with a number of different vitamins right now. Methyl B12, glutathione. There's over 100 of them that are on trial right now, where the FDA wants to ban them from the list of vitamins that are being compounded by holistic compounding pharmacies. You'll only be able to get this stuff. You can't even get NAD anymore over the counter. You were able to get NAD over the counter last year, and this is all, in my opinion, as a result of the hundreds of millions of dollars that go to Washington every year for lobbying by drug companies, and the tens of billions of dollars that are spent every year by drug companies for advertising. So it's a serious thing, but I think Americans are smarter than that, and so I want to be a part of that possibility where we finally overcome this problem of the corruption of the health industry. And that's where I want to be.
Yes.
I don't care what the outcome is. I want to be all for that.
Well, you can do a few things, right? You can focus on the problem, or you can focus on the solution. And it sounds like you, along with I'm like sitting here going, yes, me too. We totally agree, because our food is just not as nutritious as it used to be. The way they process is not. It's like taking all the we don't have the food quality that we did before, and our bodies are starving of vitamins and minerals and things that we typically years ago maybe could have gotten through food much easier. But now we do need to supplement, and unfortunately, the FDA doesn't make money there, so there's a lot of a backlash sometimes on that. But I know that functional medicine, integrative medicine, and holistic thinking is only going to rise as people see benefit from everything that we're talking about, and then they're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think it's going to take us as a nation, essentially, to truly understand what's going on and be loud about it, and then things may have to change. And I know you are really a loud part of the solution. So what are some things you're doing these days to bring more awareness to NAD and biohacking and all of the things that you're doing?
Well, I spoke to the head of the Naturopathic Physicians Association a couple of days ago about, perhaps starting a grassroots protest of the FDA, getting more involved there. If there's some updates as to what it is that we're doing, I'm sure, I'll contact you, and maybe we can put something up on this podcast. Or you can reach out to my nonprofit. There's the Center for Research on Addiction and Brain Health, which is, my website is brainresearch.center. There might be some information there in terms of, getting more active in fighting for our liberty to have the kind of healthcare options that we want to have.
Amazing. Now, I know if any listener lives in San Diego, they can physically go to the NAD Treatment Center and get to know your services. But do you have anything for those that may live outside of San Diego?
Well, like I said, there's options in terms of working with our doctor here in San Diego, and sort of getting a teaser of NAD through some of the other formulations that we have that are coming out all the time, nasal spray, cream, patches. They're not as strong as the IV drip. What scientists are sort of seeing is like the body, the cells respond differently at different concentrations of NAD. And so it's sort of like finding a high level of NAD. We're probably seeing the body do the cells doing certain things that it wouldn't otherwise do. So getting an extended period of time. So we see a lot of people sort of have permanent effects, anecdotally, from getting IV NAD for a number of days, sort of one and done type effects, you know.
Okay, so they could travel to San Diego to get treatment, and
we see a lot of people that do some of the smaller dosages where they see sort of temporary relief from doing the NAD. I don't think I would have bounced back unless I got a heavy dose. I didn't feel hardly anything from the NAD until, day 7 rolled around. So I mean, but if you certainly feel amazing off of doing taking an NAD pill, then yeah, absolutely. But you can take niacin if you're economically challenged. I mean, you can get like a whole year's supply of niacin for $20. But the thing with niacin is it has sort of side effects from taking it, like nausea and things like that. And some people don't want to really demethylate. There's a demethylation process from taking niacin, or even the nicotinamide riboside. We see that, but with the NAD, it seems to be sort of a cleaner response. Again, I'm not a medical doctor. These are just observations that I've seen. But
do you have any cool stories of clients that you've seen at your clinic that have experienced crazy relief as well?
There was one guy that was taking 60 hydrocodone a day, 60, and we took him off of the hydrocodone cold turkey, and he says he experienced no withdrawals.
Oh my gosh. So one question I have is especially for the IV, it's 8 hours a day for the season, and then it sounds like you come back for boosters. Is that right?
Your mileage is going to vary. Some people.
Okay, so it just all depends on what they're experiencing. Come back.
I mean, I was in a state where she approached me and she said, the gal, Anne, who I was working with, she approached me and said, you should really consider doing boosters. I'm like, why? And she says, well, it's awesome. And I'm like, well, why do I have to do boosters? I just done it for 12 days. And she said, well, it's just something about it where if you come back, it after a month or two, you feel this enormous. It feels like you're getting to the next level. And I said, you know what happened here was totally miraculous. I'm gonna go with it. So I came back in, and what do you know? I mean, like, I continue to see my health improve. Like with while I was there or after a few days. Sometimes it takes we always say it like takes 2 weeks to really feel like most of it go into your system. But we had one patient who's coming off heroin, and he was doing great, and then a couple of weeks later he got in a car accident and flipped his Jeep on the freeway, and then his girlfriend broke up with him, and he was back to smoking heroin. We said, well, why don't you come back in? And he's like, I'm doing great. I'm just on heroin again. And I'm like, well, you really need to come back in and do some more NAD. So he came back in, and we hooked him up again with some NAD, and he's back. But I mean, if someone's going to go and get sick or have a stressful event, we see that there's a need to get more NAD. If someone's dealing with something that's very chronic that hasn't figured out, maybe they have a chronic inflammatory condition, you can see a lot of the the problems that of not getting boosters. But I mean, a lot of the stuff can knock out a lot of these issues. So it's still very much an art, is what the answer is.
Well, and I know that, I mean, imagine, I think of the person who is just like you, were laying in bed wondering, how do I have the energy to function? And then I also think of the family surrounding them and the impact that addiction, chronic pain, fatigue can have on all of the relationships surrounding that person, and how just by doing this treatment, you've got yourself back, which means your relationships are better, your energy is better, you have a hope for the future that you didn't have before. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are looking for that too.
I mean, yeah, it's, there's a lot of moms that show up that they got that look in their eyes where they feel very depleted, and they're very vulnerable too. And then they get into sort of, in my opinion, they get in a tough position in the health system where they've been pushed to, maybe do some things with the psychiatrist, but I think there's a time and place for all that stuff. I'm not against medication. I just think it's just overused, and so.
Now I have one last question, and tell me a little bit about the mindset shift you've seen in people that start taking, or they get their first few treatments and they feel lighter than they ever have in the past. Have you found people that come in rock bottom and then come out with a purpose that they didn't even know they had?
A lot of them come out with the purpose to start an NAD clinic.
So they're like, everybody needs to know about this.
I don't know. So, that's pretty common. I get a few people that call me up and say, "Hey, you saved my life. Thank you." That certainly it's an incredible thing to hear. Mm-hmm. As far as what people they get back to what it is that they wanted to do, they wanted to start a business, or they wanted to just spend more time with their children. I mean, they wanted to travel more. I had a guy say he wants to get back to photography. It's whatever it is that you're like, that's your thing. You go back to it, run a company, write a book. It's that big thing that you wanted to do. Now all of a sudden you have all this energy, and it's cool because I'll be looking at, I'm a little bit exhausted from this week, no doubt, but I went from not having enough energy to sort of outpacing everybody around me. It's like, are you really going to stop working right now? So it's amazing what you have, more fuel for whatever it is that you want to do. And it becomes very important. I think the results are much bigger when you're 60 or when you're 50 or when you're 65. You're seeing greater benefits. My mom, she's in her 70s, and she was in Hawaii. She's like, we just decided to get in a helicopter and go to another island. And it's like, I would have never done that on NAD. I'm like, I'm in my 70s. I'm like, she flew to India by herself. I mean, she's nuts. I mean, part of it is because she's nuts. My mother's like, a little bit crazy, but she's also this NAD too.
Yeah, well, it seems like there's a clarity. There's a lightness, there's a clarity, there's a passion, there's an energy. And when you have lived life so long with this cloud of darkness or this confusion, and addiction can take over and consume. And when you have the mental clarity and the energy to not have to worry about that anymore, in a sense, and the whole world is open to you. So what would you say to anybody who's listening, who's interested in learning more?
I would say, the doctors aren't always going to have you look at the root cause, but really get to the root cause of why your illness is happening, and work on that, and not all the symptom the symptoms. I mean, obviously you might have a serious symptom and that needs to be worked on, but NAD could be very helpful in giving you that boost. And it can be very promising for a whole host of conditions. And it's not consistent, although I think it's very consistent for alcohol and opiate addiction. But it's a little bit less consistent with some of the other chronic conditions. And if you've run out of options and you're looking for something that may give you a chance to really change things, I'd say give NAD a try.
Absolutely. Know that it exists and that you're not stuck, that you truly can do something to get life back. So thank you so much, Tom, for sharing your story, your powerful story of how, your 7 years of darkness is now not only shining a light on you, but it's shining a light in the whole world, the health industry. You are helping to create the solution to something that is honestly quite broken. So thank you for sharing with us today. I've been so interested in hearing your story.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So if you're listening, go to nadtreatmentcenter.com and check out Tom's work and definitely connect with him if you want to continue to learn more. Thank you so much for listening today. Head over to denisewalsh.com. Enter your email to subscribe to our list, and I'll be sending out an early bird special coupon. 50% off, in fact, of the Dream Life Workbook when it is launched in just a few months. So if you want to have first dibs, let's get your name on that list. Thanks again. I so appreciate you. And remember to dream big.